M. Night Shyamalan to me is by far the most fascinating director of all time. I'm going to go through the timeline of his filmography and then get to why I find him so damn interesting. Starting with his breakout movie, The Sixth Sense, though not technically his first, it was his first big success. And then his follow-up effort with Unbreakable, Shyamalan took Hollywood by storm. So much so that leading up to the release of his third film, Signs, Newsweek dubbed him the next Spielberg. But what happened next was what made that title so egregiously misplaced. See, Signs released and it's generally seen as pretty good now, but not back then. Not the box office success that The Sixth Sense was, nor the critical success that Unbreakable was, but it's still a decent third film. But it did have a bad reputation for a long time, and I think only recently are people starting to come around to it, which makes the rest of his filmography very interesting to see how they also age. And if we just quickly look back on the filmography so far, he opened up with a thriller film famous for its twist, so much so that the twist itself may even be more famous than the movie. Then, he did an unlikely superhero film which was incredibly nuanced and grounded, before superhero films were even a big thing. Then for his third effort, he did a sci-fi thriller involving aliens. 3 incredibly different films, but the slow decline in quality was what may have struck Shyamalan to go out on a limb again for the 4th time. But this time maybe try to recreate the feeling of The Sixth Sense, and in doing so created The Village. The Village was Shyamalan's first truly controversial film, but certainly not his last. It received heavily mixed reviews and was mostly berated for its twist ending that is seemingly as shocking as The Sixth Sense, but nowhere near as well done. It felt as though the twist was what drove Shyamalan to the story, and he built everything else as a vehicle just to get there, which is massively unfortunate for such a bold and, dare I say, sometimes brilliant director. Me personally, I quite like The Village. I think it's a very underrated film in his filmography, and I think people need to go back, watch it, and give it a second chance, but that's the general consensus. But then, the worst happened. Shyamalan went on to make a string of films that all derailed his career. Lady in the Water, a self-indulgent mess, The Happening and The Last Airbender, 2 of the most universally agreed upon worst films ever made, and then lastly After Earth, a Will Smith ego stroke full of bland characters, a bland script in a bland world. This string of 4 certifiable flops massively outweighed his mostly 4 successes. The title of the next Spielberg no longer makes any sense, does it? Well, that was until Hollywood gave up on the guy. He couldn't get funding and decided to use a $5 million loan on his own estate to create his next film, a small little found footage horror called The Visit. I fucking love this film, and not only did I love this film, a lot of people loved this film. His first non-blunder in over a decade. It was a true return to some kind of form for the man. But did he stop there? No, he didn't. He took the profits from that and spent $9 million of his own money to fund his next movie, Split. And this is where it gets very interesting, because Split is a very interesting movie. Critically, it's mostly agreed upon that it's a very good film. Audience-wise, people also seem to really love it, but it's a curious film because it doesn't feel distinctly Shyamalan. It almost feels safe. Now, if there's one thing I could call Shyamalan, it's daring. He's always trying something new, either it be a new genre or a new camera technique. He sometimes directs actors weirdly or experiments with different types of dialogue, often off-putting, but Split is just a bog standard, great movie. The directing is beautifully simplistic, and I think this is part of his genius. James McAvoy is giving such an impressive performance, probably the best of his career so far, so Shyamalan decides to not try to create any alternative feelings with the camera or editing. He just allows McAvoy to absolutely tear up the scenery, because the script is good enough for an actor like McAvoy to just go ham with it. along with Anya Taylor-Joy, who easily could have been a very bland character in this film, but delivers an understated and perfectly rich performance. So this could be a case of a director being carried by his performers, though I don't personally believe that. There is a case to be made for it. Also, Split ending up being a sequel to Unbreakable was an insane move to pull and got audiences really excited for him again. So, though I do feel like sometimes the movie plays it safe, although his directing is very good still, especially the scenes with James McAvoy getting very, very intense, the camera makes it feel so claustrophobic, it's genius. I think he played it slightly safe because he had invested so much of his own money into the film. But he did take some risks with taking it in the same universe as Unbreakable, which paid off tremendously, and I'm glad that he was able to keep that under wraps until after the movie came out. But things got rocky again for Shyamalan because he went on to release Glass, a sequel to both Unbreakable and Split, yet fell short of both. It received mixed reviews, some finding it a grounded and unexpected end to the trilogy, and some finding it an unjust and unsatisfying end to some of their favourite characters in cinema. Now this film is interesting to me because I myself have massively mixed feelings on it. For one, I think it is by far the most beautifully shot Shyamalan film, and I love how he experiments with the camera again here. It feels distinctly him, twist and all, and the concept of the film is just insane enough for me to like it. Plus, back to the directing, the colour palette that he chose for this film is gorgeous, and the way he displays those colour palettes to represent every character is fucking beautiful. It is definitely like a comic strip, which I'm sure is the effect he was going for in a lot of these scenes. And going back to the concept, a woman gets these so-called superhumans into a mental hospital and tries to convince them that they are not in fact super, they are just victims of memory manipulation and coincidence. Honestly, I think it's genius. It's the perfect place to take a third installment in this series, because the film itself has the audience questioning whether they really are super or not. I love the first 2/3 of this film. The final third, however, is tragically misplayed, and I think this is where he lost a lot of people. Spoilers for Glass if you haven't seen, but David Dunn dies in a fucking puddle. Now, I get how they're telling us it happened, but realistically, it shouldn't have happened. I'm aware he was trying to subvert expectations, but what we thought we were going to get or should have got is infinitely better than what we did end up getting. And that third act severely hurts the film because that's what people remember the most. I think if he had just nailed that third act, the film would be honestly just as praised as Unbreakable and Split is, because the first 2/3 are incredible. The rockiness didn't stop here though, as his next film was Old. Again, a very mixed reviewed film. Some calling it a misunderstood masterpiece, some calling it Shyamalan's next great fall. Old is a very weird movie. I watched it for the first time the other day and I just cannot wrap my head around whether I love it or despise it. I think M. Night makes a lot of awkward and objectively bad choices when it comes to the directing and editing. A lot of the actors are horrible, the dialogue is unnatural and unsettling, and I don't know if he's going for this purposefully, but if he was, he kind of failed. It just feels very amateurish. Which brings us to today, with Knock at the Cabin just releasing to mostly positive reviews, so it seems he's back on top. But what makes Shyamalan so interesting to me is the fact that he can make some of the most well-received movies of all time. He can create such immersive and beautiful stories, and it isn't a fluke, he's done it plenty of times in plenty of genres. But then he can also create the worst films you have ever seen in your life, and they can happen one after the other. He can release a masterpiece and then follow it up with absolute dog shit, and you just never quite know what you're going to get. But the one thing that Shyamalan will always do is try. He should be a great inspiration for many filmmakers and artists in general. No matter how many flops he has, no matter how many doubters he has, he will always adventure into unknown territories and take risks. He will always make the movies he wants to make, with as many wild concepts as he wants. He will always say fuck the studio and fuck the critics, and I think that honestly is such a brilliant attitude, because this man will fail. He has done and he will do in the future, there is no doubt about it, but he has never been afraid to. Honestly, I'm glad there is a director on such a scale that takes absolute risks with his movies. Not the way James Cameron gambles $2 billion budgets or Tarantino makes another film overly expressing the N-word. Shyamalan takes risks in his reputation, his career, his money, and even his house for his craft. He's a true artist. And that means he is capable of such atrocities and in equal parts perfection. You just never know what it's gonna be until you have it. I think this comes with his innate desire to experiment. No matter how far into his career he gets, he constantly tries to do something new that he hasn't done before in every aspect of the filmmaking process, whether it be the concept, genre picking, writing, editing, camera movements, angles, tone, colour palette. He's always trying something he hasn't before. And I think that kind of adventurous nature should be rewarded and not shunned. He's been laughed at and ridiculed, which in parts is fair, but also is entirely unwarranted. And I think it's about time we give him some respect. Because he may produce a massively varying in quality filmography, but he also isn't a coward, and he always attempts to discover what he can do, and I think that's one of his best qualities. He's always pushing himself, even if he sometimes pushes himself off a cliff. He's willing to do it to give the audience something new. And I think that about does it. I wanted to talk more about his films individually, but I might do a ranking one day of all of his films, so I'll save my opinion for then. Otherwise, let me know what you think of M. Night Shyamalan yourself, what you think of this video, continue the discussion below on whether they're from the king of twists or not. As always, keep watching movies.